Indigenous and Northern Affairs. We recognize that we meet on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe peoples, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, February the 1st, and the order of reference of Tuesday, November 19th, 2024. The committee is resuming its study into the barriers to Indigenous economic developments. We have a witness today, the Honourable Randy Boissonnault, the Member of Parliament for Edmonton Centre. Welcome to our witness, MP Boissonnault. You'll have 10 minutes for your opening statement, after which we will proceed with rounds of questions. Mr. Boissonnault, you have 10 minutes.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, the last few weeks have been an incredibly difficult time for me and my family. I would like to clarify any confusion about my heritage and my previous business relationship. In 1970, I was adopted by a supportive and loving family. They are the only family I have ever known. Growing up, my family taught me about their Indigenous heritage. I was told that my great-grandmother, who I knew as a child, was Cree. That was our family's understanding. Later in life, I sought advice on how to speak about my family history in a thoughtful way. As someone adopted into an Indigenous family, I wanted to speak about that history in a way that was respectful and accurate. That is why I worked with an Indigenous researcher and how I arrived at the term non-status adopted Cree. This term ensured that I claimed no Indigenous status for myself, while also honoring the Indigenous heritage of the family who adopted and raised me. During the pandemic, my family delved further into our history, which led to my adoptive mother and brother becoming Métis citizens earlier this year. Further revelations have come to light through the media since October, which was as much a surprise to me as it was to Canadians. It has been a difficult time to see our family's history be challenged publicly, and I recognize the ways in which I described my heritage have not always been as accurate as they could have been. As I have said before, for this, I sincerely apologize. To be clear, I have never claimed Indigenous status for myself. Edmonton has one of the fastest growing urban Indigenous populations in Canada. As the MP for Edmonton Centre, I attended Indigenous caucus as an ally. I welcomed the opportunity to represent the interests of Indigenous Edmontonians as an ally. I have never attempted to leverage my adopted family's history for personal or political gain. I've never identified as Indigenous on any application form, nor have my businesses ever benefited as a result. I believe the safeguards in place to prevent non-Indigenous businesses from receiving funding meant for Indigenous proponents are extremely important. With respect to global health imports, GHI, I am glad the current safeguards worked correctly. I am committed to doing my best, always to be clear about my history and to be a better ally for Indigenous people. I've learned much from this difficult experience, and my commitment to reconciliation has never been stronger. Regarding my former business partner in GHI, from what has been discussed by the media, I believe that since 2021, Mr. Anderson has used my name without my consent to further GHI's interests. I believe he has conducted himself unethically and may have misled many people. I take my obligations as a public official seriously. I did not operate any business while serving the public. During my time with GHI, before my election in 2021, the company never received any funds from any federal contracts. I am not named in any of the lawsuits against the company, and the events that have been reported by the media occurred after I stepped away from the company. To be clear, after I left in the fall of 2021, GHI continued as a company under the exclusive direction and control of Mr. Anderson. I should never have placed my trust in him as a partner. His alleged actions have seriously harmed my reputation. Despite ample time and opportunity to explain himself, including at the Ethics Committee, he has refused to do the right thing and come clean. He has refused to admit that he has been using my name without my knowledge or consent. He will have another opportunity to do so if he is called to the bar of the House of Commons. I expect him to do the right thing then and tell the truth. I deeply regret having gone into business with Mr. Anderson, and I will protect myself and my reputation from his alleged actions. I have sought legal counsel to explore any and all options that may be available to me with respect to Mr. Anderson's alleged actions in an effort to clear my name. It is the honor of my life to serve the people of Edmonton Centre and to have served Canadians as a minister. I remain focused on doing the job I was elected to do. Chers collègues, Monsieur le Président, les dernières semaines ont...
Dear colleagues and dear Chair, the last few weeks have been a time that has been very difficult for myself and my family. I would like to clarify all confusion on my family heritage. In 1970, I was adopted by a loving and caring family, the only family I have ever known. Growing up, my family shared with me their Indigenous heritage and history. I was always told that my great-grandmother, who I met as a child, was Cree, and this is how we've always perceived our family history. Later in life, I sought counsel to know how to talk about my family heritage. As a person adopted by an Indigenous family, it was important for me to do it precisely and respectfully. It is in this spirit that I collaborated with an Indigenous researcher who suggested I should use the term non-status adopted Cree, and this allowed me to recognize the Indigenous heritage of my family without reivindicating any Indigenous status for myself. During the pandemic, my family did more research on its history, which allowed my adopted mother and brother to become Métis citizens earlier this year. Since October, other revelations have come out in the media, information that were of a total surprise for myself as they were for Canadians. This was a very difficult time to see the story of my family questioned publicly. And I recognized that the way that I described my origins wasn't always as precise as it should be. As I've said before, I present all my sincere apologies on this. To be very clear, I never asked for Indigenous status. Edmonton has one of the most quickly growing urban Indigenous populations. As Member of Parliament for Edmonton Centre, I participated in the Indigenous caucus as an ally. I never sought to exploit the story of my adopted family for political or personal gains. I've never identified as Indigenous in any applications or forms. I truly believe that the mechanisms in place to stop non-Indigenous businesses from using the financing for Indigenous businesses work, and I've realized that the mechanisms we have in place did work. I commit to always be transparent on my story and to be a better ally for the Indigenous people. I learned a lot from this difficult experience, and my commitment towards reconciliation has never been so strong. As for my previous business partner, after what was divulged in the media, I think that Mr. Anderson used my name without my consent in order to promote GHI's interests, and he did so since 2021. I think he was unethical and he could have caused a lot of damage, and I take my position very seriously. I did not have any business while I served as MP. I never should have trusted him as a business partner. His alleged actions have had an important impact on my reputation, and he has had many possibilities to change the information and to say the truth, but he has refused to admit that he used my name without my knowledge or consent. During my time with GHI, before my election in 2021, the company never received any money from federal government contracts. I am not named in any of the suits against the business, and what we have seen in the media occurred after I left. After I left in 2021, the business continued under exclusive control of Mr. Anderson. I truly regret to have gone into business with Mr. Anderson, and I will do everything I can do to protect myself and protect my reputation. I consulted a lawyer in order to explore all the options available to me when it comes to Mr. Anderson's alleged actions in order to protect my reputation. It is an honor for me to serve the people of Edmonton Centre as an MP and to have served the Canadians as a minister, and I continue to focus on the work I was elected for.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boissonnault. That was right on time. I appreciate that. Welcome again to committee, all our new faces around the table. And we begin the first round of questioning for 6 minutes. We have Michael Barrett.
Mr. Boissonnault, I'll give you an opportunity to come clean with Canadians. Who's the other Randy?
Mr. Chair, could you have the member please clarify his question?
Well, it's a pretty straightforward question. In your previous appearance at other committees in this scandal, you said that it was an other Randy. Who is the other Randy at your former company, Global Health Imports?
Mr. Barrett, I am not involved in any of the conversations. If you are referring to reports in the media, I'm not involved in those conversations. And the ethics commissioner has indicated very clearly that I'm not involved in any of those conversations, any of those texts between Mr. Anderson and the person you just raised. And in fact, if you take a look at recent court cases, both the Gowie Group has indicated that they've never met me. I've never met them. And 4M Medical has indicated that they have never met me. I have never met them.
So the problem that we have is that you had previously said that you didn't have any contact with your business partner, Mr. Anderson, while you were serving in Justin Trudeau's cabinet. But then when you got caught, you admitted that you had, of course, sent text messages and that there was a phone call between you and your business partner exactly when he was corresponding with potential clients and fraud victims about Randy and Randy being in Vancouver, and that's where you were. The problem that we have is that in committee appearances, you've lied about owning 50% of the business. You lied about being in communication.
Mr. Chair,
you lied about there being another
that is
Randy.
not a fair characterization, Mr.
You
Chair.
lied
Mr.
about
Chair,
being
point of order.
Indigenous,
Point
and
of
you
order,
lied
Mr.
about
Chair.
being a journalist. How can we believe
Hold on,
anything
Chair,
that you
point of
say
order.
today?
Mr. Barrett, just 1 second, please. We have a point of order. Mr. Fresh, I don't know who raised it. It was
Go ahead, Peter. Okay.
All together.
Yeah.
Mr. Carr.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, can you provide us with your reflections, please, on whether or not you believe it's within order to refer to a member in committee as a liar? Perhaps you can consult the clerk if you're unsure.
Point of order, Mr. Chair,
Yep,
too?
Hang on.
On that same point of order?
Mr. Duran.
Just, we also have the Conservative House Leader who refers himself as an American insurance broker, and we know that's a lie. Are we
Okay,
going to
all right,
invite him
okay,
at the committee?
okay,
Just
okay,
wondering,
okay,
just wondering, same
all right.
standards.
Okay, well, maybe we can change the language a bit and not refer to people as liars. And I'll give you your time back, Mr. Barrett.
How can we believe anything that you say when all of the things that I've listed that you said aren't true? When you said you were Indigenous, you said you were a journalist, you said you weren't in contact with your business partner, you said that the company wasn't getting any federal contracts. All of those things aren't true. You said one thing and the exact opposite is true. Now, your Liberal colleagues want to put flowery language around that. If you say something that's not true, we all know what that is. Why should we believe you? How can we believe you today?
Well, Mr. Chair, through you, I would like to inform Mr. Barrett that he's simply mistaken and putting false claims on. We've litigated this at ethics now twice, and the ethics commissioner himself has indicated that on the 6th, 7th, and 8th of September, I was not involved in the text messages that the National Post and that the Conservatives keep trying to raise. I'm simply not the person involved in those conversations. There was a text exchange between me and Mr. Anderson regarding a Purelator account that needed to be settled. And I was very clear about that at ethics. There was no communication between us on the in the following days. Mr. Barrett,
Seems
I
to
was at
change. Your
cabinet.
story always
No, I
seems
was
to
at
change
Mr. Barrett,
once
let me
you,
finish.
once
I
you,
was
no,
at
no,
cabinet
sir,
on the
it's
7th,
my time.
and there
Your
was no
story always
communication,
seems
and then
to,
I was there on the 8th as
your,
well.
Okay,
Point of
one
order.
person at a time, please. It's very difficult for the interpreters to figure out what's going on here. One person at a time, please. I believe Michael Barrett had a question, and then we'll have a answer. Mr. Barrett. Point of order from Mr. Frederick.
This has been happening regularly in this particular exchange, and I think that it's good at the outset just to clear it up. Let's give the witness enough time to offer a response back.
Point of order? What we've experienced in this committee is the person asking the question is due their time, and is in this case, Mr. Barrett is due his time to ask the person the questions he wants to ask. So just challenge the chair to keep that priority. Thank you.
Yeah, what my goal here is that the length of the question matches the length of the answer. Sorry, the length of the answer matches the length of the question. We'll try to keep that as close as possible, and that way it doesn't mess up the interpreters too much, and everyone has their time. So, Mr. Barrett, you have the floor.
equal time. You said you were a journalist. Are you?
Mr. Barrett, I was a regular reporter for the Francophone news outlet, CBC Radio Canada.
Yeah,
I was
that's-
a member of the Canadian Media
And that
Guild.
was equal time,
for
and
civil
that's
rights.
not what CBC has said. You said you were Indigenous to get federal contracts disenfranchising Indigenous peoples. Are you?
Mr. Chair, that is simply false. That's not true. I've never claimed Indigenous status, and I've never applied for an Indigenous contract. Full stop.
Well, we know that that's also not true, because the company that you own 50% of, Mr. Boissonnault, did exactly that. Your company, GHI, is under investigation for fraud and being investigated by the police. Is that correct?
I've not been contacted by any police service to that effect. And Mr. Barrett, I was not involved in any federal contracts while I was operating.
And so
a
as
company.
much
It's
as
very serious.
you want to distance yourself from it, this is very much yours to own, because you in fact own 50% of it. So you were willing to cash the checks, but you're not willing to take any of the responsibility for where the money came from and how it came to be in possession of the company. Suspicious warehouse fires, fraud
Point of order, Mr.
investigations.
Chair.
Mr. Carr?
I'm wondering, for the benefit of myself and other committee members, I would very much appreciate if the clerk could provide the timing of the length of questioning that you are allocating. It's 6 minutes per member. Every time that you stop the clock to deal with a point of order or to address something Mr. Barrett or Mr. Zimmer or others have said, I'd like it to be tracked for the committee that you're not providing more time to Mr. Barrett. So for our benefit, please, if you could have the clerk.
Are you questioning the judgment of the chair?
I am asking for the chair through his
Are you
clerk.
questioning the integrity of the chair?
I am
Mr.
asking the chair
I
through the
have the
clerk.
timer right here, Mr. Chair, and I am keeping as close eye as I
So,
possibly
Mr.
can.
Clerk, I'm going to ask through you then, please.
Well, no,
sir.
that's not how this works, Mr.
Oh,
Carr,
okay.
you
Well,
know.
then, Mr. Chair, I'm asking.
We
and I
trust
don't
your
believe-
chairs at committee when it comes
Mr. Chair,
to that time.
Mr. Chair,
I've
I'm
answered
asking
your-
on a point of order.
I've answered your point of order.
Point of order,
I
Chair.
am
This is
watching that,
clearly
Mr. Chair.
disruptive,
Yes.
intended to be disruptive.
Sorry, I
Let's get
wasn't
back
done
to
my-
work.
I
Let's
wasn't
get
done
back
my
to the
point.
work of this
I've
committee.
already ruled on that. Thank
Point
you.
of order.
If you wish to challenge
There's
the
too
chair,
many
go ahead.
people
But
speaking. We
Ms.
need
Sidney.
to be respectful of the interpreters.
yeah, absolutely. So I've ruled on that. If you wish to challenge the chair, there is a
I
process
will
for
challenge the
that.
chair.
Okay. We'll go
Running
to a vote.
interference for Randy.
Mr. Clerk? So the challenge, would you prefer?
Well, you
wording?
said you made a decision, Mr. Chair. If you
I've
haven't
made a
made a
word-
decision, I have
decision
no
that-
challenge to make.
That the
If you
chair,
have made a
as
decision,
the chair, as always, Mr. Carr, I know we got some time here. The chair in any committee has been responsible with the timing, whether
Correct.
it's Mr. Weiler or myself.
correct.
All right. We've never had a problem with that. I don't
Correct.
anticipate there's being a problem now. But now you're calling into question my
I
integrity.
actually have not, Mr.
And
Chair.
so-
I've simply asked that
And I've
the
made a
committee.
ruling that I will keep track of the time. I have 2 people on either side of me
Okay.
that will watch. I have done nothing to impugn my integrity. The fact that
I
you're
haven't
still
suggested
questioning
that you have, Mr.
is,
Schmidt. I've
rather
simply asked for the
frustrating.
time to be made.
So having said
public.
that, enough. We don't want to waste any more time. So if you wish to challenge the chair, we'll challenge and we'll have a quick vote. If not, we will move on with Mr. Barrett, who has the floor. So
So
what
just,
would you choose
so
to
I
do?
can confirm here, you are not agreeing to allow for the committee to be aware of how much time is being allocated
I
to
have
other
the
members?
timer right here. It's in
Okay.
full view of 2 other people.
Okay, so at any point, you're comfortable if we check in on that?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Barrett, you have 45 seconds. Floor is yours.
So, Mr. Boissonnault, while you were claiming to be Indigenous, the Liberal Party was also echoing that claim on their websites and posting that you were Indigenous, and the ethical problems that presents, of course, are self-evident. But I'd like to know from you, if you're aware, how much money the Liberal Party of Canada fundraised off of your false claim and their false claim that you were Indigenous when that was simply false.
So, Mr. Barrett, I sat at Indigenous Caucus as an ally between 2015 and 2019. And during the 2019 election, the party mistakenly included me on a list of Indigenous candidates. When I realized that I was on that list, I called the party, we contacted the party, and we had that mistake corrected. And I have never received, as a candidate in 2015, 2019, or 2021, any funding from the fund to support Indigenous candidates. And that is appropriate as it should be, because I do not claim Indigenous status.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Boissonnault. That completes that round of questioning. I believe Mr. Handley is up. Is that still correct? Mr. Handley, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to Mr. Boissonnault for making the tremendous effort to appear before committee today. I know this is not an easy task. Indigenous identity, Mr. Chair, Indigenous heritage, that's obviously very important to me in the North and in the Yukon, as is the nature and the practice of First Nations procurement. Mr. Boissonnault, through you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Boissonnault, as Minister of Tourism previously, and then ESDC and official languages, you've been a great friend to the North, and certainly a frequent and a welcome visitor to the North. I have never heard you claim Indigenous identity. You've always been very well received by First Nations chiefs and leaders in our territory. So I just wanted to put that on the record. In your testimony, you say, I'm committed to doing my best to always be clear about my history and to be a better ally for Indigenous people. I have learned much from this difficult experience, and my commitment to reconciliation has never been stronger. Words to take note of. But Mr. Boissonnault, I'd like you to take the opportunity to expand on what you have learned through this experience and what you can share for all of us as members of Parliament.
Well, Dr. Hanley, I appreciate your comments. And as you mentioned, I've never claimed Indigenous status. And I always wanted to be clear about my family's history and my own identity. And I see in hindsight now that, the term that I used in the past was not as clear as it could have been. And I've learned about my own family's history, in recent months. And for me, I think it's a combination. And I hope that the committee can look at this at some point, because I think there's a nexus between identity, Indigenous identity, and how you talk about your heritage, should there be Indigenous heritage, where there's no claim to Indigenous status. And I think this committee being able to have a conversation about that and elaborate on that and have experts come to the table to talk about that would be really important. I mean, Dr. Hanley, I wanted to honor my family's history. I mean, the other option would have been to simply not talk about it, which I didn't think was right. That didn't sit well with me. And so that's why I wanted to be able to refer to my family's history, but also indicate that I was non-status. Like, I don't have Indigenous status and I don't claim Indigenous status. And so my commitment to reconciliation and to working with Indigenous peoples manifested itself in coming to Indigenous Caucus and asking if they would, let me sit around the table as an ally. And that's what the caucus decided to do in 2015. And we worked through a great number of issues together, to defend and advance the rights of Indigenous peoples. And I'm happy that I was able to participate in that work. And look, in my own city of Edmonton, we have the fastest growing urban Indigenous population in the West, and we have a lot of work to do together. And I approach that work with humility, but with resolve, because there's a lot of work that we have to do together, and I'm committed to continuing to do that work. And I have reached out to elders, to community leaders, Dr. Hanley, to get their advice on how to talk about these matters, on how to express myself, on how to, share my family story in a way that is that can be understood, but also that is sensitive and respectful, not just to my family, but to Indigenous peoples.
Thank you for that, Mr. Boissonnault. I think that's very helpful, particularly the advice of what the committee can take on and probe and study further and understand. I too am an ally and a member of Indigenous Caucus, so I certainly respect and understand that position and the importance of us as allies being involved in Indigenous concerns and issues. You do mention Indigenous heritage, status, and identity, and I wonder, for the remaining time, if you can just help us through your experience distinguish between the importance of making that clear, that distinction between heritage, status, and identity.
Well, my experience, and I think it's the case for everybody, is that identity is deeply personal, and it's important to get it right. And in my case, being adopted into the family that raised me, the only family that I know, I wanted to, honor their history, and I wanted to do so in a way that was sensitive and respectful to Indigenous peoples. And so, look, this has been a really a tough couple of weeks, couple of months for us, but at the coming, now here today, I can say that I'm, thrilled for my brother and mother to be part of the Métis Nation of Alberta and to be connected to that community, and it helps me to have that clarity. And look, we went through all the way through the archives, the Library of Archives, all the way to see which of my ancestors actually has script, and I have that information. I understand the genealogy completely, and I think it's important for all Canadians to be able to talk not just about their identity and who they are, but also the heritage that they come from. And I think as more people dig into genealogy, we saw that take place during the pandemic. We saw that there were revelations about people's own identities and their own family histories that they found surprising. And so here we are today. But I do think, to your earlier point, Dr. Hanley, that the work of this committee could be very important in unpacking that nexus of identity.
Mr. Boissonnault, we'll just get you to wrap up your answer.
Status.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. I believe we are welcoming to the committee a new block member, Ms. Sinclair de Gagne. You have 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et je tiens tout d'abord à réitérer que vous avez ma pleine.
Thank you, Chair. And I first of all want to say that I fully support you. I trust in the way you're attributing time. Mr. Boissonnault, hello, and thank you for being with us today. We've noted the apologies that you have presented in your intervention at the outset of this meeting, and we want to be able to determine whether or not that is sufficient. It's not us, but it is the First Nations and the Métis and others who were taken aback by all of these occurrences. It is up to them. Reconciliation rests on the recognition of First Nations, and the identity of Indigenous has been subject to benefits from the government, and to say that you are Indigenous mistakenly or wrongly can have consequences. You know that many errors were committed, and someone of your status, say you're not just anyone, you are a minister of the Crown. What message do you think that sends to First Nations, Mr. Boissonnault? Thank you, Chair. And Madame de Gagné Sinclair. I've never said I had status, Indigenous status. I've never applied for a contract reserved for those having Indigenous status. I've never been able, I didn't touch monies that were reserved for Indigenous peoples. I think we agree we have to look at this and shed some light at what happened, look at it closely, because the First Nations have worked too hard to achieve reconciliation, to achieve equity with people who are not Indigenous. And I think we have to denounce anybody who falsely claims to be Indigenous. I've never said I was Indigenous. The fact that my former ex-partner sent this email to the government without my knowledge is erroneous. And I was so confident of his actions, but he did so without my knowledge. I learned about it in the newspapers, and I stepped aside from cabinet because I couldn't carry on. I quite agree with you that these contracts and business dealings that are set aside for Indigenous people should be dealt with only by Indigenous people. They are the ones that are supposed to get the funding. So you say that you absolutely did not know that Health Imports was benefiting from this so-called Indigenous status before it became public. But it was over the course of several years, even many years. Is that what you're saying? You are not aware of that? You never were aware of it? Three things. When I was a private citizen, I said when I was queried about ethics, because I was a former member of Parliament, that I never had any business dealings in this way with GHI and the federal government. The ethics commissioner felt that it was very good for me to be clear about that I had no contact with the federal government, but that it be contracts or whatever, because that would be inappropriate. Second thing, Madame Sinclair de Gagné, when I was a private citizen, I worked through the system of applying for the business deals through the LGBTQ system. I was able to certify that the business was 100% LGBTQ. I hate to interrupt you, but my time is very limited. The changing of the administrator of the business was on March 17th, 2023. And you didn't benefit while you were an elected member, but as of that date, you had come back to the House. And how do you explain the fact that there was still involvement? I explained to the ethics officer it was in terms of the registration that I had stepped away from this business in September 2021 when I was elected. My lawyer contacted Mr. Anderson's lawyer, and it was understood that he had made the change, but he didn't do the change. He didn't make the change. We don't agree. It's not the responsibility of the business itself, but the business of the administrator. And you were the administrator. You continued to be the administrator of the business that was contracting with the government, so that remains your responsibility. And another issue, you're saying that you didn't take responsibility. That's too bad. I didn't say that. I have signed documents signed by lawyers that I was no longer in that position after I was elected back to the House.
Thank you very much for that line of questioning. Next, we have the NDP and Ms. Idlout for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chairperson. First, I would like to ask you when you stated that you were Cree, what Cree nation did you belong to? Did you say you belong to?
Mr. Chair, I don't seem to have translation.
So, okay.
Test, test, 1, 2, 1, 2. Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you for appearing. I would like to ask you, when you claimed your family was Cree, what Cree nation did they belong to?
Have Inuktitut chosen on my screen, and yet I'm not hearing anything come from the interpreters.
Yeah, point of order.
I believe, as it's pointed out, Mr. Druin.
Français fonctionne pas. Donc, je remercie mon
I'd like to thank my colleague.
français fonctionne pas.
Expertise, but there's no French interpretation. French is not working.
Okay, do we have any interpretation working right now?
What did you say?
Testing, testing.
Okay, I will switch over to the French channel here.
Yeah.
Okay. French is working? Okay. Okay, Ms. Idlow, do you just, maybe our Inuktitut
Testing. Thank you for appearing. First, I would like to ask you, when you claim your family was Cree, my question is, what is your family, what Cree nation does your family belong to?
Thanks very much, Ms. Idlout, and I really appreciate your question and your repeating it. I grew up understanding that my grandmother was Cree, and I didn't question my family about which nation, which place. It was the family, our story, and it was, as I understood growing up, in our family, and it was, one of those things that we learned about. We didn't talk about it a lot, but I know growing up with my great grandmother, she wasn't part of a nation. She married into a settler. She married a settler, and so there was no First Nation that she was connected to because she had married into a European family, and so I didn't call it after that.
Thank you. You answered my question. I'll keep going. I also know a white person that was adopted to an indigenous family, but has always stated that he is not indigenous. That he is a white person. There is there is nothing to discredit him that he is indigenous. So I will ask you this: how important is your consent before publications are made about you?
If I understand the translation, Miss Idlout, I take very seriously the fact that I am not Indigenous and I've never claimed Indigenous status. And look, all of the articles about me that have been full of misinformation.
And I'm sorry, you're not answering my question. I'm going to ask you, how important is your consent before publications are made about you?
Well, I think that it's important to have consent about who I am and identities before things are published. It doesn't always happen that way. People publish things about me without my consent regularly. When it comes to my family's Indigenous heritage, I wanted to be clear about it and sensitive about it and never claim Indigenous status. And that's what I attempted to do in the past. And I understand that I could have been clear about that. And for that, Ms. Edlout, I have apologized. And I hold to that apology.
Thank you. There are now several incidences when you have said there are others that that publish mistakes about your identity. My question is, how clear have you been to others that when they publish anything about you, that you need to provide consent? How clear have you been to others?
Well, anytime that I've seen my name associated with Indigenous status, I have been quick to change that because I have no claim to Indigenous status, and I've never claimed Indigenous status. And so if ever I have seen somebody refer to me as an Indigenous person, I've gone to great lengths to correct that. And I don't claim Indigenous status, and I never have, and I never will.
I do need to say this because there are so many mistakes that we're all now talking about with your identity. And we've heard about you claiming to be Cree. We've heard you claiming to be part of now your family you being part of the Métis Nation of Alberta. You've now seemed to have changed your story about the publication with the Liberal Indigenous Caucus, and then asking them to fix that mistake as well. There are so many publications, there are so many interviews with you that you've claimed that your Indigenous identity is who you are. Then for you to race shift from being Cree, from being Métis to being white, now being adopted, what you are sharing with us is hard to believe. And how can we believe that you have never told your staff, your staff, that you don't want publication about you not being Indigenous? We've heard that you've instructed your staff to say that you are, and now you're saying that you've never claimed to not be Indigenous.
Ms. Idlout, respectfully, I have never indicated to any staff at any point in my life to refer to me as Indigenous. That's simply not the case. And I've always tried to be consistent with who I am. I've never claimed Indigenous history. I never said I was Cree. I came up with the term non-status, adopted Cree, because I thought it would honor my family, and I thought it would indicate very clearly no status. I am not Métis. My family has recently become members of the Métis Nation of Alberta, but adopted kids like me have no claim to citizenship in the Métis Nation of Alberta, and that is as it is. But I will never claim Indigenous status. I never have, and I was adopted into the family that I was adopted into, the only family that I know, and that is why I have always tried to be very clear about that history.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boissonnault. We go now to our second round of questioning. We start for a 5-minute round with the Conservatives. Mr. Jennis.
Mr. Boissonnault, you said today that you came to the term non-status adopted Cree through consultation with an Indigenous researcher. What was the name of that researcher?
I met with Chad Cowie, who was a student.
Thank you very
doing a
much. We know.
PhD at the time.
Thank you. We know who Mr. Cowie is, Professor Cowie is. In an interview with the National Post, Professor Cowie denied your version of events. The National Post quotes him as saying, "I would not say that I gave him the term that he was non-status adopted Cree." Did Professor Cowie tell the truth to the National Post, and do you now want to correct your opening statement?
My opening statement was very clear, Mr. Genuous. I said that I chose the term non-status adopted Cree after having a conversation with Mr. Cowie. That conversation was almost 3 years ago.
So now it's clearer than it was. So you sat down with Professor Cowie, and he gave you some advice. You ignored that advice and came up with this term independently on your own. And then you came back to committee and said, well, in the context of conversation, I came up with this term. Frankly, that's what we've come to expect from you, Mr. Boissonnault, but I think it's now further revelation of what we have come to expect. My next question is, the Liberal Party's Indigenous Peoples Commission put up an Instagram post on June 30th, 2016, which falsely claimed that you were Indigenous. Now that post is still up. Wow. You said the error was corrected. Why were social media posts falsely calling you Indigenous left up right even till the present day?
I don't have an answer for why that's still on that party website, Mr. Genuous. I can tell you when I was on a list of Indigenous candidates in the 2019 election, I acted very quickly and removed that.
Okay. So let's just get some clarity on what you meant when you said that the error was corrected. So there is an error in a June 30th, 2016 Instagram post. That error was not corrected. The post remains up today in December of 2024. What exactly did you mean when you said the error was corrected?
Mr. Genuous, I wasn't aware of that 2016 Instagram post. I was referring to the list of Indigenous candidates in 2019 that I was falsely on and made that correct. And the error
Okay. So you corrected a list in 2019, apparently, but you and your team are not closely monitoring the social media activity of the party that you're a part of. Was the false claim that the Liberals elected 9 Indigenous MPs in 2015, was that false claim ever used in Liberal Party fundraising?
I don't have that information in front of me, and I would not be on that list of candidates.
Okay, so maybe we need to follow up and see how much money the Liberal Party raised off the false claim that there were 9 Indigenous MPs elected in their caucus in 2015. Mr. Boissonnault, you have said repeatedly that you've never claimed Indigenous status. And it should be obvious to everyone that that is an intentional formulation when you say you've never claimed Indigenous status, because that is not the same thing as saying you've never claimed to be Indigenous. A person might claim to be Indigenous without claiming Indigenous status. So let's get around the lawyerly formulation here and ask you the core question. Have you ever claimed to be Indigenous?
Mr. Genuous, I'm not Indigenous, and I've never claimed to be Indigenous or to have Indigenous status. This is a distinction. I'm not sure you were going with this, but I'm not Indigenous. I don't have Indigenous status, and I've never claimed either.
You've never claimed to be Indigenous. So on April the 12th, 2016, when you said in the House of Commons that as a Canadian and as an adopted Cree, you weren't claiming to be Indigenous. When the Liberal Party of Canada posted that you were Indigenous and it was not corrected, you still had never claimed to be Indigenous. When your partner claimed that your company was Indigenous owned, you had still never claimed to be Indigenous. There are all these people around you that have publicly claimed that you are Indigenous. You have said in the House of Commons that you're Indigenous, and now you're before this committee saying that you never did. How can anyone believe anything you say, Mr. Boissonnault?
Mr. Genuous, I've never claimed to be Indigenous. What I said in the
on the record.
House was that That is not. You're misinterpreting the
Okay,
record.
we'll
That's
let,
not.
we'll let
what
Mr.
I said.
Boissonnault answer the question, and then
I've
that's the end
How
of
many
that
seconds do I
round.
have, Mr. Chair?
You can answer the question, and that'll be the end of this round.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I have never indicated to the Liberal Party of Canada that I'm Indigenous, full stop. And I tried to come up with a term that I now understand was not clear. For the record, I'm not Indigenous. I don't have Indigenous status, and I would not claim either.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Genuous. Next, we go to another 5-minute round to the Liberals. Welcome, Mr. Drouin.
I don't think I'm up.
My list says you are, so anybody else want to go?
Non.
I'm
Puis aller
sure
en
the Conservatives
français,
will take your time if you don't want.
ça va me faire plaisir de y aller en français, par exemple. Monsieur Boissonnault, merci beaucoup d'être ici avec nous aujourd'hui.
Thank you very much for being with us today. I would like to thank you also for making your statement. And I want to thank you for being here as a member of Parliament, as well as representing both official languages. I want to give you the chance to reply to Mr. Genuous's questions as to what was said in the House, and given the interpretation that some Conservative members are drawing from your statement then.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Drouin. J'apprécie.
Thank you, Mr. Drouin. I certainly appreciate your asking me that. With respect to your question, when I was a member for the first time, and after having worked on some this non-status adopted Cree, it was to express the history of my family, not to say that I was descended from Indigenous peoples. I tried to create this term because there was no other to express my situation, and I wanted to be as clear as I could be at the time. I have to say clearly, I am not Indigenous. I'm not claiming that I am, but I am part of a family that has just received its citizenship in the Alberta Métis Nation. Because, of course, caucuses aren't televised, and the First Nations caucus has allies, and I remember very clearly that you were part of it in 2016. There are other people who were also part of the caucus, but who weren't First Nations or Métis or Inuit. At what point do you feel that it's important for a caucus to have allies that are not Indigenous to get ahead in society? There is a need, rather, for champions, for allies. And when I approached in 2015 as member for Edmonton Centre, the Indigenous caucus, I wanted to become an ally and a champion for them. In Edmonton, there's a market presence, a significant presence of Indigenous peoples. And given that I was their representative in Parliament, and also given that at the time felt that the Indigenous caucus, a very important one, required more representation, I approached them and asked for their support in my becoming an ally for them. And that's what I've done. I remember very clearly, despite the fact that we don't discuss what we do in caucus, that there were representations that often are made to the Prime Minister. There is talk about reconciliation. There was talk about reconciliation and a platform. So I certainly understand the reason why you would have wanted to be an ally in the caucus. And there were other people who were in the caucus. I just want to come back to the type of photo that appeared in 2019. and I know how the error occurred. You were part of the caucus. You corrected it in 2019. I'll be honest with you. I'm not obsessed with looking at all your Instagram posts. I have no idea about what happened then or even what happened yesterday because I have more important things to do, with all the respect that I owe you. But you are saying that it was corrected in 2019 during the election period? Yes. Is that what you're saying? Yes, it was corrected.
You have about 30 seconds.
Okay. Monsieur Boissonnault.
Mr. Boissonnault. I know it's not custom for members to appear before a parliamentary committee to hear them pass judgment on what they have said, true or not, or whether or not the statements were false. But I want to thank you for appearing before our committee and all the time that you have spent on this issue. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you, Mr. Doyen. I think it's important to set things right, set the record right. And I remain an ardent champion and ally for Indigenous peoples.
Thank you very much, Mr. Drouin. I appreciate that. Going to a 2.5-minute round. Welcome once again, Ms. St. Clair Desgagnés. 2.5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair. Mr. Boissonnault, some people have heard you talk about and perhaps romance about, in a sense, your grandmother and stories about when you were young. And we've heard you on some occasions begin your speeches with Cree, speaking Cree, the Cree language. Do you think that this type of behavior, for someone who is not Indigenous, does not seek to be, is something that should be recommended, or could it lead to misunderstanding? I hope that's not the case, because I've always done so in the spirit of sharing my personal history. At the beginning of my mandate, I wanted to be an ally of Indigenous peoples, and I remember I spoke with several of them who said, you are talented in languages, and it would be really important for you to add Cree in your speeches, maybe at the beginning of your speeches, in the spirit of reconciliation. That is what I did. So there was no cultural appropriation involved here, according to you, despite what people say. But it has been said that it was harmful for the efforts of reconciliation for you to repeat this narrative because you didn't claim to be Indigenous. And so I think it's up once again to the Indigenous peoples to decide about whether or not it was offensive. With respect now to your practices for contracting for businesses, for procuring business, do you think that, I'm sorry, Chair? Chair, where's the chair? Chair? Do you think that it would be a good idea to give us a register created, that there should be a register created by First Nations, identifying who are their peoples? That would help the federal government when it allocates monies and contracts that are earmarked for Indigenous entities. Do you agree? Madame St. Clair Desgagnés, just to draw a parallel with my expertise when I was a private citizen, my business, which is 100% owned by me, it went through a process to be identified 100% LGBTQ at the time, and I believed that there were agencies and third parties that went through the process for certification. It's very important so that the government understands and knows full well what companies that it has to do business with, that it has to transact with before giving out the funding that is, say, earmarked for Indigenous peoples. Yes, I think that would be a good idea.
The end of this round, it's only 2.5 minutes. So we go now to the NDP and Ms. Idlout for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairperson. If when you are appearing before committees, what are you doing to correct all of the mistakes about your identity?
Ms. Idlout, I would be happy to meet with you separately and get your advice on what you think I should do. But I have not stated that I'm Indigenous. I've not ever stated that that I seek Indigenous status. And so I haven't there haven't been any steps.
I'll stop you right there because I don't have a lot of time. Pretendianism is not only harmful, it is fraud. I want to understand, what are you doing to seek on guidance how to make amends?
I really appreciate the question, Ms. Idlout. And I think pretendianism needs to be denounced. It's deeply harmful, and it disrespects Indigenous peoples and all the hard-fought battles that they have won to date. And so I have been speaking with Indigenous elders, with community leaders. That work will continue. And the questions that I've been asking is, how do we build trust in the relationship forward? How should I best talk about who I am and my family and their history? And look, to Ms. Sinclair de Gagné's conversation, I'm going to check in, and I have checked in with Indigenous leaders and elders about using Cree in my speeches. Do they still want me to do that? Do they still think it's appropriate? And so I'm having these conversations. I think that's part of my own learning journey here, Ms. Idlout, and I will continue to do that. And I will take your advice as well on how I should make amends, because I never intended to be unclear about my history or my family's history. And I think that is an important personal act for me when it comes to reconciliation.
Thank you. My last question is, how are you repairing the pain and suffering you have caused to Canada's Indigenous people? How will you be repairing this to the Indigenous peoples?
Well, I hope that I have started by apologizing for using a term that was not as clear as I could have been, and I will seek advice on, as you said, on how to make amends and to listen to the harms of people who seek false Indigenous status and Indigenous heritage, which I have not done and I won't do. And I will be very, very clear. I've apologized, and I hope that allows us to build from here. And I really appreciate your sensitivity and how difficult this is for the people that you represent, Ms. Idlout. So I take that very seriously. And if I could, I would say thank you in your language. If that were appropriate, but I'd seek out your consent to do that first. So I will just say thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Boissonnault. We continue on this second round of questioning, but now we go back to 5 minutes. Now to the Conservatives, Mr. Cooper.
Mr. Boissonnault, through you, Mr. Chair, have you commenced legal action against Mr. Anderson?
I've sought legal advice, Mr. Cooper, to look at all of my legal options.
So the answer to that is no. So let me get this straight. You claim that you are not the Randy and Anderson's text messages. The first report of this Randy being implicated in the $500,000 shakedown of the Gowie Group was all the way back 6 months ago on June 4th of this year. On July 17th, Anderson testified at the Ethics Committee that the only Randy at Global Health Imports was you. That day, you issued a statement in which you said you were, quote, deeply troubled by Anderson's testimony and suggested that he was using your name without your consent. That was 5 months ago. If you truly had no involvement in this shakedown of the operations of Global Health Imports, and Anderson was using your name unbeknownst to you, you would have sued Mr. Anderson 5 months ago, I would put it to you. You still wouldn't, you've done nothing, is what you've said.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Cooper,
Mr. Drouin?
Just, I'm seeking your advice as to, is Mr. Cooper offering legal advice to Mr. Boissonnault, or is he just pontificating on something? Is he a lawyer?
I am a lawyer.
Thank you. I don't think that was a point of order. I think that was a question. I appreciate it. Mr. Boissonnault, the floor is yours.
well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, to Mr. Cooper's question, I have started the process to take legal action against Mr. Anderson now, and I'll be very clear. One of the reasons I stepped away from cabinet was to be able
Besides
to
retaining
Mr.
counsel,
Chair, do
besides
I get my
retaining
time?
counsel, it's my time,
Hold
I'm
on.
reclaiming
Chair?
my time. Besides retaining counsel, have you taken any legal steps whatsoever against Mr. Anderson in the past 5 or 6 months?
Mr. Chair, how many seconds do I have from Mr. Cooper's opening statement?
It's a very simple question. Just
okay.
answer it.
Okay, hang on. Okay, as I said from the beginning, the time of the answer should be as close as possible to the length of the question. And so I've been giving a bit of leeway here, but I want to keep it as close as possible. So,
So Mr. Schmale, to
We'll
Mr.
give you-
Cooper's first, I haven't been able to answer his first question because he interrupted me 3 times.
Okay, why
So
don't
can
we-
I answer his first question?
well, he took the floor
I'm ready
back.
to
so
answer his first
I guess the time is yours. However,
This is
usually you just answer the question you just gave you.
So I'll answer the question. In the recent court case against Mr. Anderson, it is clear that Mr. Anderson has been using my name without consent. I'm not involved in
And my
those
question to
other
you was whether
conversations.
you had commenced a legal action and you have, through your non-answer, said that you
We are
haven't.
working
And so,
on-
so
we are working
Mr.
on the legal
Boissonnault, it's
action
fine.
right
We're
now,
claiming my
Mr.
time,
Point of
Mr.
order,
Chair.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, point
Just
of order.
again,
I don't know who was first, Mr. Drouin or Mr.
Running
Carr.
interference.
no, Mr. Cooper, it's you're running interference. I thought the rule was if there's editorializing on a particular issue, then the witness has the same amount of time to answer the question,
No,
but
yeah,
that's not.
There's the preamble and there's the question.
On the same point of order.
Hang on, I got
Well,
Mr.
hold on a
Carr up
second. I'm not
next.
done. I'm not done. But
The-
for the respect of interpreters, Mr. Cooper keeps interrupting the witness. And I get that he doesn't want to ask questions. He just wants to editorialize on
Okay.
certain issues and make false claims
You don't
here.
have to give him.
But at the end of the day, Mr. Boissonnault has offered his time to be here, which is unprecedented, because I'd love to have Andrew Scheer here about his fake
Okay,
insurance
okay,
claim.
Okay, I think
On the
I think
same
we
point
got
of
that.
order, Chair.
But
I
just
think we're
let's
good.
be
Let's go to
respectful.
Mr. Carr, then Mr. Genuis. Okay, Mr. Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I think Mr. Drouin covered it. I just, for the sake of our interpreters, particularly given that we've got 3 different languages being interpreted here today, I think it's for the benefit of committee that all members involved in discussion are mindful of that. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, Mr. Genuis.
Yeah, just briefly on the point of order. The rules are not equal time between the questioner and the witnesses.
That is correct.
The rules,
Just
the rules
given the
are that
circumstances.
the member controls the time. So that needs to be understood. And secondly, let's be clear that Mr. Boissonnault is not here because he chose to come. He is here because there is a House order requiring him to be here for 2 hours. There's an unprecedented move, House order requiring him to be here. He has to be here for 2 hours, answering 2 hours worth of questions. And these liberal disruptions are just extending the amount of time that we're going to be here.
Is he?
Now, the reason I said that, yes, you are correct, Mr. Generous, that is the rule. The reason I allowed a bit of latitude in terms of the length of time was because, in fact, we do have 3 interpretations going on at the same time. However, I do understand that witnesses do try to stretch things out. So the members do have the ability to take the floor back. So let's go back to Mr. Cooper. I even forget what question you asked, to be honest with you.
Well, Mr. Chair, I put it to Mr. Boissonnault if he had commenced legal action. He did not answer in the affirmative. I then asked Mr. Boissonnault if he had taken any legal steps whatsoever against Mr. Anderson. He changed the subject and didn't answer in the affirmative. And I would put it to him that the reason Mr. Boissonnault hasn't pursued legal action after 5 or 6 months is because the brass tacks of a court proceeding would expose him as the other Randy who violated the Conflict of Interest Act and who had an active involvement in a shady pandemic profiteering PPE company implicated in fraud. Now, Mr. Boissonnault, your credibility as a witness is very much in doubt. You came before the Ethics Committee on June the 4th, and you left the committee with the distinct impression that you had not been in contact with Stephen Anderson when that wasn't the case. Mr. MP Brock put it to you. Did you call Mr. Anderson? You said, no. Why would I call Mr. Anderson? I would not. No. You said that. And then after new text messages were revealed connecting Randy in Vancouver while you were in Vancouver, suddenly you changed your story and said that you had actually spoken with Anderson and had a text message exchange with Anderson. If you have nothing to hide, why did you materially leave out that relevant fact if you're not the Randy involved in the shakedown?
So, Mr. Cooper, let's go back to your earlier question. I stepped away from cabinet to deal with these issues, and I have met with lawyers, and we are working on legal action against Mr. Anderson right now. So let's put that on the record. The ethics commissioner, not once but twice,
I asked you, Mr. Boissonnault, why it is you materially omitted that fact, and I would put it to you. I'm going to ask you another question, but as Mr. Carr runs interference to protect you because you're a liar.
Whoa, Mr. Chair, there are
Mr. Carr's.
There are 3 things here. The first is Mr. Cooper a moment ago referred to Mr. Boissonnault as a fraud. I'm not sure that that's within the scope of standing order provisions. Number 2, he just repeated the word liar, which you've already ruled on today, Mr. Chair.
You got a minute.
And the third thing, Mr. Chair, is that you made a ruling earlier this meeting that it's equal time for questions and answers, regardless of if to Mr. Genius's point, which is fair, regardless of whether or not the standing order provides a provision for that or not, you ruled on that, Mr. Chair. So we would have to come back to that commentary that you made earlier in the meeting. Nonetheless, I would hope, Mr. Chair, that you will advise Mr. Cooper to be mindful of language he's using that you have already ruled to be out of the scope of order here. And quite frankly, really not well placed for parliamentarians. Thank you.
Well,
okay, Mr. Drouin.
Mr. Cooper should withdraw his comment. It is unparliamentary language towards another member of parliament. Withdraw. Otherwise, I'm going to keep point ordering this. Withdraw the comment. Unacceptable.
I'll ask another question. Then Mr. Drouin.
Are you responding to the point of order, or are you continuing?
I continue with my line of questioning.
Okay.
Point of order.
Okay, Mr. Drouin
Withdraw
again.
the comment. He should not be allowed to ask questions. This
Mr.
is the
Cooper?
pure rules.
Okay.
Withdraw. Withdraw.
Withdraw. Your microphone's off.
I continue with my line of questioning.
Point of order,
Mr.
Chair.
Boissonnault.
Okay.
Point of order on the same point of order that's been raised.
Practice status.
It's a very simple thing. All he has to do is withdraw the comment. He knows very well. He's an experienced parliamentarian. That is not parliamentary language.
I will withdraw the reply and restate that he misrepresented to committee that he hadn't spoken with Mr. Anderson
Point of order,
when he
Chair.
did.
Point of order,
That
Chair.
is that is
Okay, he
that is a
withdrew.
fact.
He did not exactly withdraw. The word that was used is liar. He should withdraw that
I
word.
did.
He withdrew, and he substituted with what was
I said that
untruths.
he misrepresented to committee that he hadn't spoken with Mr. Anderson at a material time when in fact he did. And
Okay.
Mr.
So you're going back to your question? Okay, you
if I-
have 1
if I-
minute left.
unless
point
Ms.
of
Lucas
order,
are gonna
Mr.
continue to
Chair.
disrupt and run interference
I think
for
we're
him.
good. You have 1 minute.
Mr. Chair,
Mr.
point of order.
There they go again.
Okay, Mr. Henley.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. What I heard withdrawn was the word lie, but what I heard Mr. Cooper state was liar. I think the word that needs to be withdrawn is liar.
I think
Thank you,
we
Mr. Chair.
all, at least I knew what he meant. I knew what he meant. Okay, Mr. Cooper. Mr. Cooper.
Mr. Boissonnault,
Boissonnault, we have a
Mr.
minute.
Boissonnault, you're continuing to mislead committee. You did so today, yet again. You said in your opening statement that all of the cloud of scandal and corruption reported in the media occurred after you had been elected in October of 2021. But you know that that isn't true because you were a partner at Global Health Imports in June of 2020, correct?
I was.
And you were not elected in June of 2020.
Correct.
And that is the very time that Global Health Imports submitted an application or a bid on a federal contract purporting to be wholly Indigenous owned. So why did you say that all of the allegations occurred after you had left Global Health Imports or as a partner because you were elected, when in fact you knew that that wasn't true? One of the very material issues before this committee, the fact that you have falsely represented yourself, or your company has falsely represented it as being Indigenous, occurred while you were not only a 50% owner, but one of the two partners at the company. Why did you mislead committee this morning on that?
Mr. Cooper, nothing could be further from the truth. And as I've stated very clearly, I was not involved in any federal work whatsoever in any of my businesses. And I confirmed that with the ethics commissioner. And so Mr. Anderson
Those were your words.
solely
before
Point of
committee.
order,
Why did
Mr.
you
Chair.
mislead committee?
Mr. Chair, point of
Why
order.
did you mislead committee?
Point of order,
Your
Mr.
time
Chair.
is up. Your time is up. Mr. Carr, point of order, and then we
Yeah,
go to the Liberals.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Cooper very clearly heard you say on 3 occasions his time was up, yet he took to the microphone again. I think that that is a clear attempt to disrespect your authority in the chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I appreciate that. Okay. I appreciate
With
the
you guys in the
cooperation of all
chamber,
members here. We're going to the Liberals now for 5 minutes, and Ms. Gainey, you have 5 minutes remotely.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Boissonnault, for joining us here this morning. An earlier part of the questioning made me think of one of our colleagues and, you know, the question around language. And I just had a quote here from Zoe Miller, who is a Mohawk teacher, among other things. And she says, learning a little bit about a different language is an excellent way to learn about the people around you and the land on which you stand. It helps to bridge the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities, Hopkins said. And this is what reconciliation ought to look like. She taught our colleague, Minister Miller, the Mohawk, that he worked very hard to learn and deliver in the House of Commons, which I think at the time really had a meaningful mark on this exercise that we've all been very diligently trying to participate in and learning quite a lot along the way. So I did just want to raise that with respect to your interest in Cree and learning Cree and maybe contributing here and there to the use of the language. I think it shows an interest and a commitment to learn about others. And so that's just a positive contribution I wanted to make in this conversation this morning. A lot has been said. I'm just wondering if there's anything else that you would like a chance to add here in these minutes that hasn't been addressed or that was cut short. Sure. I'd just like to give you the floor.
Thank you, Ms. Gainey. I really appreciate that. And look, I also heard Minister Miller speak Blackfoot when we were in southern Alberta, and it was very well received by the First Nation. Let me just go back to the last line of questioning. Mr. Anderson should never have ever applied for a federal contract from funds reserved for Indigenous people. There's just no scope for the company that we ran to be 100% Indigenous. He did that without my knowledge or consent. I found out about it in the news, and I'm very happy that the safeguards in place prevented the company from getting that contract. And if you actually take a look at the access to information, the actual information request, only Mr. Anderson was corresponding with the federal government, because it's really important that the monies that we set aside, Ms. Gainey, for Indigenous peoples in our government are accessed by Indigenous peoples. And I think this committee has really important work to do to make sure that all the necessary safeguards are in place to do that work and to prevent anybody who's not Indigenous from accessing those funds.
Based on the experience, which I know has been difficult on a few fronts, are there any other learnings or lessons that you would take from this? You've mentioned a couple of suggestions that you think that this committee could probably look at a little more closely in terms of moving forward. Do you have any other insights based on what you have been through and are going through in terms of how we can do better as parliamentarians and in tackling these kinds of challenges?
Look, maybe there's a role when we become MPs, regardless of how long we've been MPs, to sit down with Indigenous peoples and just get a sense of how do we share stories? How can we be an ally and a champion and tell and share stories without crossing any line where you're telling a story that's more than your own? I think understanding how do we go beyond a land acknowledgement, which is very important. To your point, what is the sensitive approach to using language? I mean, I enjoy sharing the words of Cree that I know when I'm at an event, and I actually use those words of Cree with one of my elder friends because she's teaching me the words and she likes to see when I use the words when I text her. And so I think if we could figure out how to navigate these waters in a thoughtful and respectful way that doesn't cause any harm, it doesn't bring any pain to Indigenous people, I think that would be a very constructive use of this committee's time, but also a really good onboarding experience for new and seasoned MPs, because this space also changes. In the 10 years since I came up with the term that I refer to myself, I learned more about my own family's history. And I think that calibration, if you will, and that ability to be sensitive in this space as parliamentarians, I think would be really important.
I agree. And I think it's actually been a privilege to be not only more recently as an MP, but as someone involved in the Liberal Party for quite a long time, that I've had that opportunity through our party's commitment to these things to learn. And I see that now in my kids in their schools. This has grown dramatically, and it's, I think, really a tremendous shift that we've seen over the last decade, this commitment to reconciliation and to learning better and clearer parts of our history.
Okay, Ms. Gainey, I'm sorry.
Thank you very much.
We're over. I appreciate that. Okay, next round of questioning. We are going for 2.5 minutes to Ms. Sinclair Desgagnés. Oh, sorry. No, I'm sorry. We go to Mr. Barrett for 5 minutes. Sorry, I apologize.
Mr. Boissonnault, on November 15th, your disclosure with the Ethics Commissioner's Office was updated to reflect a loan receivable from an individual. Is that related to any business venture, including Ms. Poon, Mr. Anderson, GHI, or Xenex, or to your collapsing or surrendering your shares in GHI?
No.
Who's the individual?
That is a matter that is with the Ethics Commissioner, and that's where it should stay.
Well, I'll note for you, sir, that it's not your prerogative to not answer questions. You cannot refuse to answer a question before a parliamentary committee. Are you refusing to tell us the name of the individual, yes or no?
Mr. Chair, can we have clarification on that? This information is with the Ethics Commissioner, and that's where it should reside.
Stop time, Chair.
Yep, sorry.
Point of order on that too?
Okay.
If the member wants to bring Ethics Commissioner questions or ethics question, he's a member of the Ethics Commissioner's Ethics Committee. He can bring that over there. This is not related to what we're discussing today. And I agree.
No,
it is between. It's a matter between the Ethics Commissioner and individuals. He doesn't share his private information with everyone. It is with the Ethics Commissioner, and she should have the respect to have the respect with other members of Parliament.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Duran. Thank you, Mr.
Yes.
Duran.
Know that.
Okay. Okay.
You go that low.
Okay. Mr. Barrett, the floor is yours.
You go that low.
I'll give the rest of my time to Mr. Shields.
Okay. Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Boissonnault, for being here. You made the comment that you've made amends for the mistakes that you have made. The Liberal Party publications have been out there and referred to a number of times today. Has the Liberal Party apologized for the mistakes they made that you asked them to correct?
Thank you, Mr. Shields. And well, I think I would say that I'm in the process of making amends. I think it's a longer process. I've apologized. And I think that was the right place to start. And the Liberal Party corrected the error in 2019. And I'm not responsible for posts that I didn't design or post. And I'm not aware if they made an apology, but they certainly corrected the 2019 error.
An apology, and you said they made the error. They've corrected it, but not apologized. That's my understanding, your answer?
That's my understanding as well.
Okay, a prime minister committed, I better read a quote to you, a prime minister committed to true reconciliation would have removed Randy from cabinet long ago. Instead, we get to watch white people play Ancestry, Wheel of Fortune. So shameful and extremely destructive. Are you familiar with that quote?
I am not.
Comes from your colleague, your former colleague, Jody Wilson-Raybould. Former colleague.
Acquaintance.
Do you believe in that, what she has stated in that quote?
Mr. Shields, I have no response to that. I'm focused on clearing my name and helping everybody understand that I'm not Indigenous and I've never claimed to be Indigenous, and I don't claim Indigenous status, and I never have.
So she's very disappointed in what has occurred as the first Indigenous cabinet minister in the role that she played as Indigenous minister, and she's very disappointed. So what has that reflected on the Indigenous people in our country as we had a leading cabinet minister, first Indigenous in that role that she played? She has a significant voice in this country, and she's very disappointed. What's your opinion of why Indigenous people should not be disappointed in this situation?
Mr. Shields, with all due respect, I have no comment on that. I'm focused on myself and my commitment to reconciliation.
When we talk about reputations that you are looking at rebuilding, as you said, and rebuilding with Indigenous, in public life, no matter what level you are, whether you're a sports person, whether you're in politics, a simple mistake basically is irreparable. How do you believe you can rebuild this reputation with Indigenous people in this country?
I think the conversations will be really important, and I have started that work with elders, with community leaders, with individuals who have reached out to me. And Mr. Shields, those conversations, I will keep doing those conversations. I'll keep having those conversations, and I will do the work of reconciliation, of being an ally and a champion to Indigenous peoples. And that is how I will continue to serve as a member of Parliament for Edmonton Centre, because it's my duty and it's my firm commitment to Indigenous peoples.
As you mentioned, representing your constituents in your constituency, this is major. This is not a minor where the first baseman of the New York Mets missed a ball coming down the line. This is a major personality challenge. How can you continue to represent all of those constituents in your riding with these major disasters?
Mr. Shields, I think it's by being honest with people and being straightforward, and it's in part why I am happy to answer your questions and the questions of all members here today. I think it's a part of doing the work, and that's what I will do.
So, time's up.
Thank you, Mr. Shields. We now continue with the 5-minute round. Back to the Liberals now, Mr. McLeod, I do believe, unless things have changed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate MP Boissonnault joining us here today. I sit on an Indigenous caucus. I've sat on the Indigenous caucus since 2015. I'm probably the only person in the room that sat on Indigenous caucus right from day one. And you know, as an Indigenous person, we're very sensitive to the fact that historically, people used to hide the fact that they were Indigenous. Because if you were Indigenous, you couldn't vote, you couldn't consume alcohol. So many things that you couldn't do if you were Indigenous. But today, we also have to be very careful when we use the term Indigenous, or in the Northwest Territories, Inuvialuit, or Dene, or Métis, because there's lots of people that are now interested in being Indigenous. So I'm very aware of those facts, and I remember the discussions that we had with MP Boissonnault, that I had with MP Boissonnault, along with others, about Indigenous caucus, and how he was very forthcoming in his position. And I think one of the first sentences out of his mouth was to state that he was not Indigenous, but he was very keen on joining us as part of the caucus because he wanted to work with us to help resolve some of the issues. And he also said something that was very interesting for me, which was that he wanted to learn more about Indigenous people and Indigenous issues. And that was very important. And it's kind of insulting when people say in public that MP Boissonnault lied and got his way a seat on Indigenous caucus, like we didn't do the proper vetting, or we didn't do any kind of research on Mr. Boissonnault before we encouraged him to join us. And that's what we did, because Indigenous caucus was about trying to get people together so we could move forward on some of the challenges that are facing Indigenous people. And we've met with other party members that represent Indigenous people. We've met with national Indigenous organizations. We've met with senators, and we're trying to find ways so that everybody can work together to move the agenda for Indigenous people forward. And we had many discussions on the purpose and the role of an Indigenous caucus. And as a MP from the North, where we practice consensus government, this was a very welcoming approach. But at no time did I ever believe that Randy Boissonnault, MP Randy Boissonnault, was Indigenous. He was very clear on that. And there is nobody that sat on our caucus then that would have misunderstood that. You know, it was very important for me to join Indigenous caucus. It was very important for me to work with all levels of government, because we had a short period of time. MP Boissonnault might remember that I used to count how many days left we had in a term, because I believe we're only here in short time periods, and we have a lot of work to do. So my first question is to Mr. Boissonnault, if he could just talk a little bit about why it was important for him to sit in with us at Indigenous caucus, and why it's important that MPs work together, that all the MPs that represent Indigenous people work together to move the agenda for Indigenous people so they have a better quality of life.
Well, MP McLeod Michael, thank you for that. You're bringing tears to my eyes. You reminded me of that conversation I had with Indigenous caucus almost 10 years ago now. And the whole point of coming and asking for permission to join the caucus was to do exactly what you said, which was to represent the people in my riding and Indigenous people of Alberta, and to learn. And I learned a lot from you. And I learned a lot from MP Rusnak, and from MP Falcon Willett, from MP Vandal, now minister, from MP Saray, from MP Durant, from everybody that sat at Indigenous caucus. And you know, when I was a minister, I stayed very close to you and to MP Batiste, who's the chair, because I care deeply about these issues. And I think the path of reconciliation and doing the right work with Indigenous peoples is one of the reasons that we're in Parliament. And
Okay,
so,
thank you very much, Mr. Boissonnault. Ms. Sinclair de Gagnier, you have 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Je vais recommencer mon temps.
Will you start my time again? Thank you, Chair. Mr. Boissonnault, let's go back to your relationship with GHI. The statements that you made when you were elected, amongst them, on November 15, a little more than 2 weeks ago, the following sentence was uttered: sole proprietor that deals a sole proprietorship that deals with investments in Edmonton, and that was describing GHI. That means that you had significant shares in this business that was doing business with the government. Am I right? No, not at all. With respect to the activities of GHI, they were principally, they were given back to the company in June of this year. That means that your statement of March 23, 2023, when you were a minister at the time, that you were the sole owner of GHI that was doing business with the government. That doesn't hold water. No. No, I was a shareholder, but I wasn't a director of the corporation. And that was in compliance with the law. I ran it by the ethics commissioner and Madame de Gagnier. This company was under the control of a third party, and that's exactly what, yes. But then why was this sentence taken away 2 weeks ago? It disappeared. Now, what changed over the past 2 weeks, Mr. Boissonnault? Yeah, that's a question you have to ask the ethics commissioner. It's not he who is responsible. You are the one who is responsible. That was a statement that you made online, but 2 weeks ago it disappeared. What changed over the 2 weeks? And it said, you said that you had significant shares in the business, but why did your statement disappear 2 weeks ago? That's a question to put to the commissioner, ethics commissioner's office, because yes, but the ethics commissioner said that you were the one who had to answer the question because you are responsible for your statements. I will look at the matter and I will come back to you personally, Madame Sinclair de Gagnier. I want an answer on that. Thank you, Mr. Boissonnault.
Quick answer, and that'll. Yep. Quick answer, please, Mr.
we finished.
Yeah. Okay. And now to the NDP for 2.5 minutes, Ms. Idlow.
Thank you. First, to clarify, I want him to answer not just to elderly. I want him to answer to all of us because we all need to hear. My question is to Boissonnault is, if you are not the source of the mistakes about your identity, then who is responsible? Is your party so loosely organized that advertisements can be published without you ever seeing them first? In my office, my staff show me all advertising proofs for approval before publishing. My question is, does a minister not have the same standard? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Idlow. And at the time, I was not a minister. I was an MP, and This wasn't prepared by my office, and I made an effort to correct the issue in 2019. And as it pertains to the 2016 Instagram post, I didn't see it. I wasn't aware of it, and it's an important thing for the party to be mindful of and to correct. And to your point, I think it is a learning for all of us out of this experience that I've gone through to be very vigilant about how each of our respective parties refers to us and the lists on which we are associated.
Why has there been this mistake? Have you tried to correct this for 4 years?
I wasn't aware of the 2016 post, and I'm aware of it now.
Your answers are not really clear. So when I first asked you how important is for you to have consent, and you said it was important for you. It's unfortunate that you are giving us a contradicting answers. So I want to make sure, you need to clearly define, tell us who you are. And when you responded that you wanted to ask me how you can amend this, make amends. And this is not right, because we as Indigenous people are distinct people. Inuit are different than First Nations, and Métis. So you need to ask your family how you will make these amends to the people you have hurt. Thank you.
Unfortunately, we are out of time. Mr. Boissonnault, maybe we'll have a chance to answer that question shortly. Next round is for 5 minutes. We go to Mr. Genuis.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Boissonnault, you granted a personal loan and you wouldn't answer Mr. Barrett's questions about who it was to. I do understand the sensitivities around this, but the committee does have a hard time believing you and obviously has many questions about your business dealings. So I want to ask, would you be willing to provide that name in writing to the committee with the understanding that it would not be made public unless the committee saw it as being in the public interest to be made public? Would you be willing to provide the name on that basis?
Mr. Genuis, I will share this with the committee. It is to a loan for a friend for a property, and it's not appropriate to share that person's name with the committee or with Canadians.
Okay, my request was that it would be provided on a private basis to the committee for the committee to consider, and it sounds like you're not willing to do that. So we'll move on to the next question. You continued to own GHI after you were elected. When did you step back from GHI operations?
Once I was elected in September of 2021, I sent an email to my lawyer, who contacted Mr. Anderson's lawyer to let them know that I was stepping away from the company.
Okay. GHI claimed to be a wholly Indigenous-owned company in a bid made in June 2020. So you had not stepped aside at that point. You were involved in the operation of the company when it claimed to be fully Indigenous-owned. Were you aware of the bid made for masks from the federal government in June of 2020?
No, Mr. Anderson was uniquely and totally responsible for federal contracts. It would have been inappropriate for me to work on any federal contracts. I confirmed that with the ethics commissioner, and it was the same approach that I used.
Mr. Boissonnault, we're talking about a time. Let's underline the date, June of 2020. We're talking about a time when you were not elected. You have said, and this is obviously disputed, but you have said you stepped back from any involvement in the company after you were elected. But we're talking about a time when you were not elected, and therefore when the company was still claiming to be wholly Indigenous owned. So in June of 2020, were you aware of bids, a bid for masks, to provide masks to the federal government?
Mr. Genuis, I've been very clear that I worked with the ethics commissioner, and I was very clear with Mr. Anderson that any federal contracts were entirely his responsibility.
And you're
still
saying
had
that
respected my
included the
code of
time when you
conduct.
were not elected?
Absolutely. There was a wall in our company so that I would not have anything to do with federal contracts. It would be inappropriate. I was still governed by lobbying provisions. I took my
And
code
at
of
no
conduct.
point in that bid did he ever
Mr.
even
Chair, do I
ask
get to
you
finish?
if you were Indigenous? Just answer the question.
Mr. Genuis had the floor.
Did he at any point ask you if you were Indigenous? How did he come to the conclusion that you were Indigenous?
He did not, and none of our company was certified Indigenous,
Yeah.
so he should not have done this at all. And I'm glad
Yeah.
that the provisions, the safeguards, prevented
Okay.
the
All
company
right.
from getting
So
the
I guess
contract.
I guess we're to believe that Mr. Anderson sat down with the Liberal Party of Canada and they both decided to falsely claim you were Indigenous without ever consulting you. Mr. Boissonnault, you've said that your Cree name means strong eagle man. Now, I've consulted with Indigenous leaders on this. I understand that being gifted a traditional name has a very specific cultural and ceremonial context. I wonder if you could share with the committee what that name is, when you were given it, who gave it to you, and what was the ceremony involved?
Absolutely, that is a gift of the name and an eagle feather by Elder Ed LaValle of the Edmonton Two Spirit Society, and that was done in a medicine blanket ceremony the Friday before the election in 2021, and it was the Elder Ed LaValle presided at that ceremony. My mom attended that ceremony, and I really respect that gift. And the Cree name is Maskau Kihiyu, and it translates into strong eagle man. And the reason that the Two Spirits Society conferred this great honor on me is because they said I gave voice to the voiceless, and that the reason they chose strong eagle man was because I would be flying back and forth to Ottawa after the election, and it was my responsibility to take care of.
Okay, well, we'll be able to verify that, and I do thank you for providing that context. Finally, you said that you participated in the Liberal Indigenous Caucus as an ally. Were there ever any other non-Indigenous people who were counted as members of the Liberal Indigenous Caucus? Because all of the public representations of the Liberal Indigenous Caucus exclusively show members of Parliament who are or have claimed to be Indigenous. So why is it that there were no other people invited into the caucus on the same basis that you were?
I'm not sure that other allies made the same representation that I did, but when we met as a caucus between 2015 and 2019.
But can you just confirm then that that's a no, that you were the only one?
No, Mr. Genuis, we frequently opened the meeting up to other allies.
No, but you were a member, right?
Point of order,
I was
Mr.
a
Chair.
regular
Point of order.
Okay, time has expired. Time has just expired. Do you still have a point of order?
Well, yeah, with all due respect to Mr. Genuis, if he wants to join our Liberal caucus, he can join, and we'll explain to him how we work inside our caucus, but our caucus is none of his business.
Okay, all right, thank you, Mr. Drew. That's not a point of
But
order.
just on the point of order, there are public posts about this Liberal Indigenous Caucus which show its members. So it's
Point of
convenient for
order.
it now to be a private caucus caucus matter.
Debate.
Time is up. Mr. Batiste has the floor now for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I do thank the previous speaker, MP Michael McLeod, I think, out of this whole discussion that we've had around Indigenous identity and Liberal Indigenous Caucus. I think his 4 minutes was the most powerful in that preamble. And as the current chair of Indigenous Liberal Caucus, I would like to put on the record that Randy has never stated that he's Indigenous to me. He's always attended Indigenous Caucus as an ally. We welcome several allies. Actually, we're hoping to get more from this. And I think that having Indigenous allies has allowed us to get to the place that we are on reconciliation in Canada, because there's very few Indigenous members of Parliament. And, you know, as a First Nations member of Parliament, I've been reflecting on this, and I've had dozens of conversations with leaders who are here for the First Nations, Assembly of First Nations, Special Chiefs Assembly that's been happening this week. And in those dozens of conversations, you know, that people aren't really talking about Indigenous procurement, or not talking about Indigenous identity. These conversations that are urgently happening at the AFN are talking about things like Indigenous policing and the safety of their communities. Now, yesterday, Assembly of First Nations called for action. They called for a public inquiry on systemic racism in policing. And in my conversations with folks over the past few months and over the past few days, you know, chiefs have told me that they're deeply concerned. They're deeply scared of what's happening in our country and in the future when in terms of Indigenous policing. You know, I've talked to parents who've lost their daughter because of a wellness check. I've had community leaders like Chief Leroy from my community said that at one point we had 20 Mi'kmaq speaking Indigenous policemen in the community, and now we're down to 2. I've had folks tell me that, you know, there should never be a death in Canada for someone being checked up on for a wellness check. First Nations in Canada should not be scared of the very people that we pay to protect them. And it's during these conversations, people are asking for action. And I've asked them, what does that action mean? Does it mean funding for police as an essential service? It doesn't mean setting targets for how many First Nations police that we can actually achieve over the next 3 to 4 to 5 years and saying, here's what we need in our communities. Is it, you know, figuring out ways in which we can collaborate with provincial, federal, municipal, and First Nations on policing moving forward? And, you know, I think it's incumbent on us as a committee that we look into this and talk about this. And I have tremendous respect for my colleagues and the choices that they make on which studies we put forward first. And I have tremendous respect for my colleagues on this matter, and that's why I've waited to the end. It's incumbent on me. I told the national chief I would do this. I want to table a motion, and you've all received it beforehand. You've seen these motions. I tabled this on September 17th that talks about that in light of the tragic deaths of Indigenous Canadians in incidents with the RCMP and the urgent emergency debate that took place on Monday, September 16th, that the Standing Committees of Indigenous and Northern Affairs, immediately following the conclusion of legislation at INAN, moved to begin with the work on Indigenous policing study. And I know that this study takes precedent. I'm not asking for that. I know that what the Assembly of First Nations is asking for is a public inquiry. I'd be willing to listen to amendments on how we can improve this study. But the original study that we tabled way back in April of 2024 called for the committee to undertake a study of Indigenous policing options to ensure that Indigenous communities have essential services for public safety. The study should examine how federal, provincial, and municipal jurisdictions can work collaboratively with Indigenous governments to advance the safety of their community members. The study should also look at the obstacles and systemic racism within the justice system and examine what barriers that prevent Indigenous people from becoming law enforcement officers. And the study goes on to talk about the I know that I only have 5 minutes, but I wanted to table this now and move this, that we get to discussion on this motion, and that I would like to move that we have a discussion about whether we can do this with the remaining 5 minutes to 10 minutes that we have in this study.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Batiste. The motion is being worked on already. I see it being typed up. We go for discussion. Mr. Melillo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is obviously a very important issue, and I did actually have an amendment to the original motion that Mr. Batiste moved that I hope he would be amenable to. I just have a question about the procedure of this. It was my understanding the original motion that was referred to, that was tabled April 11th, 2024, was never actually moved. So I'm not sure if this motion that now refers to the other motion that was not moved would actually be in order before we go any further.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Melillo. According to the clerk, the original motion was never actually moved or voted on, so you are correct. That the reference. So, Mr. Batiste, if you quickly want to respond.
I'd like to move it now.
Okay. He's moving the motion, so any discussion? Mr. Melillo, then Ms. Idlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I mentioned, I would just like to move an amendment to that motion, and hopefully we can dispose of it and get back to the questioning. It would just be additional text at the end. It would say that the committee also requests the Parliamentary Budget Officer prepare research and comparative analysis of policing provided through the First Nations Inuit and Inuit Policing Program and non-Indigenous police services, beginning at least as early as 2015-16 to 2023-24 and future years as data availability permits. Factors to compare are to include, but not be limited to, funding for facilities, equipment, personnel, compensation and employee benefits, culturally responsive and specialized services, training and oversight and accountability mechanisms, as this research and comparative analysis be submitted to the committee within 60 days. The rationale for this is to understand from a financial aspect what would be necessary to help fill the gaps in First Nation policing.
Okay, we're going to circulate that in both official languages if it hasn't been already. Yeah. Ms. Idlow? Sub amendment now? Oh, the amendment, sorry. Ms. Idlow?
Thank you. I also want to put in an amendment. But the amendment I'm proposing is tied to the Liberals' proposal or request. I would like to see the Conservatives' amendment first, and I will mention these. Not just tell us about these, but also show us what's being done, because we all know what's being published or what has been proposed. I want to see them first, because without having them see, I can't really provide input. But I will want to provide input afterwards.
Mr. Genuis is next.
Yeah, Chair. I think this is a very important discussion. I'm not a regular member of the committee, but I'll just say that there's a House order that we hear from the witness that we have for 2 hours. That's a House order. Committees can't not withstand a House order. And there seems to be some confusion about that in terms of the setting of priorities here. Committees have to respect a House order. I understand that there are some members who want to review this. My proposal would be that we proceed to hearing from the witnesses at this time, and there'll be time to do other things afterwards, but that we proceed to hearing from the witnesses. Do you agree that we should? Okay, well, we've got a House order for 2 hours.
Right.
So maybe I'll just ask the chair, do we have extra resources?
We do have extra resources.
We have extra resources. Okay. So we're going to finish the time allotted.
Well, we're done with that round. We go on to the fourth round of questioning. At that point, we did have Conservatives, Liberals, and then Bloc and NDP for 2.
I'm not moving anything because I can't. I'm not subbed in, but I just wanted to get clarity about the process here. So I'll leave it to the regular members to decide. But we're gonna get a full 2 hours either way. So,
correct.
Thanks. Okay.
Yes.
So I waited till the absolute end, to the absolute last point of this, to ensure that that happened. That was 11 minutes ago and 22 seconds ago when I started my question. So it's been 6 minutes extra that we've discussed this. I do believe that we should give time to the Bloc and the NDP to finish this round, but I made sure with absolute certainty that this would not take away from the discussion in the House order, but that we absolutely made sure that this thing that's being called upon by the National Chief, by the Assembly of First Nations, that was addressed. And so I think this is minimally impairing this at most 6 minutes to finish this round, and then we can get back to this discussion, and hopefully by that point we'll have the sub amendments circulated.
Okay, we have secured additional resources. And Mr. Carr is next up online, and then that's correct. There was time for one extra round, Mr. Carr.
That's true.
The two things, Mr. Chair. The first is, can you or the clerk please just confirm what time this meeting began?
We did start late. I will get the exact time.
8:17. Okay. And what time did Mr. Baptiste's intervention begin?
You have the exact time. There was time for one more round of questioning.
Okay, so why are we talking about additional resources when we will have satisfied the 2 hours that the House order
Well,
put
the two,
upon us?
we did start late and there were multiple disruptions, so we were
Right,
going
but
to
dis-
allow
but
one
disruptions
more
are
round of questioning.
disruptions or not. I mean, the committee proceedings were 2 hours.
Yeah. On that point, the Liberals can't say that their repeated efforts to disrupt the testimony count to satisfy the House order. We will have 2 hours with Mr. Boissonnault in accordance with the House order, and I have no problem discussing other matters in the interim, provided that there's no that there's not a failure to understand what the obligations this committee has in terms of the House order. And I think you've very responsibly, Chair, secured resources so that this important issue that's been raised can be discussed and that we can also satisfy the House order at the same time. But the Liberals trying to say that their repeated disruptions count in the time is obviously absurd.
Mr. Chair, just on a point of order on that note, if a member opposite uses language like liar, which is in contravention of the rules, and as a result of their use of that language, takes time away from the committee, that is hardly the fault of members opposite of them. They used that language by choice. The time that has to be used to deal with that is not a penalty against any other member. It's the result of, it's a byproduct of the behavior that they chose to comport themselves with. So for clarity, Mr. Chair, I think that's important.
Point taken, Mr. Melillo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Obviously, this is a very important motion. We're waiting for a sub-amendment to address this more wholesomely, but we do have rounds of questioning to finish. I would like to respect everyone's time. I would move that we proceed back to questioning of the witness and come back to this discussion once that sub-amendment has been circulated.
We need to vote. You got the motion? Okay, the motion as moved by Mr. Melillo is to proceed to the next questioner, which would be Mr. Cooper. So we will have a vote to proceed to.
Mr. Chair, point of order.
Yep. Hang on. Okay, Mr.
Just,
Drouin, and then
we can,
Yeah, but it's dilatory, but
Yeah.
but there
To
was a
adjourn
motion
debate.
that wasn't dealt with before you introduced a new motion.
it's to adjourn debate.
No, but the motion.
No, it's not to adjourn debate.
No.
It's a different motion.
No.
Oh, we don't need to vote. We just unanimous consent to remove both motions, and then you guys can proceed
That's all,
after, right?
yeah.
We're good. We're good. We're good. Yeah. We don't need
Is
to
there
vote on
from the
this.
Bloc and the NDP?
It'll be quicker.
Yeah, we don't need a recorded vote then.
Well, we agree. Do they agree? Oui.
Microphone, please.
And I don't know what I'm being asked of.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. McLeod.
Mr. Chair, it's getting very difficult to follow. I'm not sure how the interpreters are doing it, but as a person that has a hearing disability, the camera is not following the speaker, which is making it even more challenging. And then there's a number of voices all coming through on my headset at the same time. So it's really difficult to keep on top of what's happening in committee.
Yeah, that's fair. Thank you, Mr. McLeod. Yes. There was a bit of discussion here, so I think what we're going to do, I think we've all agreed across the table to hold discussion on this until the the amendment to the motion is circulated and we have time to discuss that. But in the meantime, then proceed to the next round of questioning. That's our understanding here. Unless we missed something somewhere along the way.
Well, we went through 2 full rounds, right? So that was the end of that, or
That
3
was-
rounds essentially.
Yep, and there was time for more until the motion was ended.
Well, how
So-
much time?
Well, yes.
6 minutes.
If we go now, we have resources and we can continue. We can try if we move quickly to at least 3 questioners, maybe 4 if we move quickly.
No, but there's 2 hours, like that doesn't add up.
Well, we did start late and then we had a number of
How late?
delays. So we were going to go
We
to
started
another
2
round
minutes late.
unless
2 minutes late.
someone moves a motion to question me. We have one more round of speakers, questioners. Okay, I'd like to get back at this so we can all move along here. Mr. Cooper, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
No, hold on a second, Mr. Chair. No. We're not restarting a new round. We were in agreement, if this was the end of 1 round, we're not restarting. It's 2 hours. We were okay with Madame Desgagnés and Madame Idlut to ask their final questions, but if they've already asked their final questions, then we're done.
Just on the same point of order, Chair. Mr. Batiste moved his motion at 10 after, and this meeting is scheduled to start at 8:15 and it started late. So Mr. Druin can heckle me and say, no. We have a House order that says 2 hours. And these guys don't understand this. They keep saying, "Oh, thank you, Mr. Boissonnault, for coming to this committee." Like, there is a House order requiring this committee to hear him for 2 hours. This isn't irrelevant, Mr. Druin. This is the central point. There is a House order that we have to comply with.
Behave like members of Parliament.
And there is a House order for 2 hours,
Yes,
and
and
this committee
behave
has
like
to
members
follow
of Parliament. You didn't. That's not my fault. That's your fault.
Now we're getting a debate, but Mr. Genuis is
Well-
right. The House order did specify 2 hours, Mrs. Lowe.
And we did 2 hours, Mr. Chair. I'm
We
looking
still
at the
had
time. We're
another
at
round of
10:24.
questioning. We still had another, Ms. Idlow. Did you want to, on that point of order?
It's not a point of order, but I have a personal appointment that I'm running late for, knowing that we were going to end at 10:15 or as close to 10:15, knowing that we only started 2 minutes later, that we've met the requirement of the motion that brought us to this debate. Given that we were only given notice of the extra resources on super last minute, I need time to look at the sub-amendment that was submitted by Eric. So there are too many things that are unknown or need clarity. And I think that we need to take the time to consider the amendment tabled by Jaime, as well as the sub-amendment and what I mentioned as the sub-amendment that I wanted to provide. So given that we need to make sure that we move forward in an effective way, I move to adjourn.
Just adjourn the debate, I assume.
Then
Well,
we-
then he has to come back for 5 minutes. Like,
okay.
Just to clarify,
adjourn the
I
meeting.
move to
Okay,
adjourn the meeting.
we have a motion to adjourn the meeting. Mr. Clerk?
Ms. Gainey?
Yes.
Mr. Baptiste?
Yes.
Mr. Henley? Mr. Fragisatos?
yes.
Mr. McLeod?
Did he,
Also-
did you get the note? He was something?
Yes, no, oh, yeah, I sent.
Hang on a second.
Just like me.
Yep.
Mr. McLeod?
Yes.
Mr. Drouin?
Oui.
Mr. Mello?
No.
Mr. Shields?
No.
Mr. Zimmer?
Absolutely not.
Miss Sinclair Desgagnés?
Oui.
Mrs. Lart,
Angyak po nga, yes.
yeas 7, nays 3.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to our witnesses. This meeting is now adjourned.